mention that my name is Nancy Fulton. I currently run events for more than 50,000 entertainment industry pros. I've been running events since 2015, and you can learn more about me at nancyfultonmeetups.com. There's a bunch of free resources there, so if you haven't checked those out, you might want to. Tonight, we're going to be talking about big budget film strategies for savvy producers, and I'm specifically going to be addressing the processes by which you make feature films that range in price from $500K to about $5 million. And the reason that I'm specifically targeting that price range is because that's usually when you're going to be funding your project by raising money from private investors, by doing pre-sales of your project to people, to companies who buy it and give you minimum guarantees, and because that's when you're going to be getting your funding from banks. Above $5 million, you're sort of moving into a whole new territory. And particularly at the moment, that's it. As you start going, your budget starts going over $5 million, you start entering sort of a new, more dangerous territory. I used to tell people that if you were doing a $10 million project, watch out, because it seems like that's a really unlucky number. If you were to go to IMDb Pro and you were to look to make a list of all the projects based on budget level, and you were to look at ones that people spent $10 million on and then see how much they generated, you'd be shocked how few of them made a profit. And that has a lot to do with the fact that, again, as the budget goes up, the difficulty involved in actually making a profit goes up, because you don't just have to make the amount that you spend on the film back, you actually have to make at least 3 times that, generally speaking. That's sort of the rule of thumb. So nowadays, that number is getting lower. Right now, we're talking about $5 million. Part of this has to do with the fact that there's no theatrical release here in the United States at the moment. It's barely possible to contemplate doing a theatrical release and making some kind of money on it. And overseas, the situation is pretty much just as dire. People aren't going into theaters for a wide variety of interesting reasons, and that used to be one of the windows where people made money, and it was also one of the ways in which distributors would say, oh, well, this film had a good theatrical release in the United States, I'll go ahead and spend more to buy the rights to it, because I know that it's going to do well worldwide. They don't have that proving ground anymore. So it's just something to keep in mind, is that as the budgets that people are producing profitably at are sort of falling at the moment, specifically due to the loss of certain windows. It doesn't mean it's a deal killer for your project, but you just need to be aware that for an independent film, as it has limits, it gets more and more complicated as the budget goes up, and over $5 million, you start entering a very complex land. A lot of people want to produce high-value feature films, like the kind they see in theaters or used to see in theaters, or the kind that they see featured on premium streaming services. Many people come to Hollywood or other film cities like Atlanta, New Orleans, New York, etc., with that specific purpose in mind. This workshop specifically overviews the steps required to produce films at that budget level. And it talks about the requirements and the steps involved in that process. It helps you understand how most people who make a living producing these kinds of films develop, fund, and profitably distribute these projects. There's a whole slew of associated videos and workbooks that includes interviews with a whole bunch of experts, that talks about different kinds of services that serve different kinds of objectives, and there's a whole bunch of tools that are discussed in those resources that may prove useful to you in achieving your goal in developing, producing, and selling your particular project. I do want to mention, and I want to make a particular point, that in order to produce projects at this budget level, you're going to have to work with lawyers, you're going to have to work with accountants, you're going to have to work with tax advisors to build this level of project. And we're going to be touching on legal, financial, and tax issues as we move through this set of resources. But what you hear in this particular workshop should not be taken as legal, financial, or tax advice. I am not a lawyer, I'm not a CPA, I'm not a tax advisor. And in fact, most of the people that are advising you in Hollywood are none of those things either. The only people that can advise you on legal issues, on accounting issues, or provide you with tax advice, specifically what you're allowed to deduct when you're producing films, what your investors are allowed to deduct, etc., how profits have to be paid out, how profits are taxed. The only people who can answer those questions are people who do that for a living and who are licensed by the state to do that for a living. And one of the reasons I do this particular workshop is because a lot of people don't know that they have to work with legal, financial, or tax experts in order to produce their projects. And we're going to be discussing at length why you need these professionals to build your projects when you're producing them, particularly at this level. I mean, you always need them, but particularly at this level. The next thing I want to mention is that every single big budget film sort of has its own characteristics, and every producer working at this budget level has different skills and different assets and different experiences, different objectives, and different associates that they choose to work with or that they have access to. Some of the elements you have in hand or some of the characteristics of your project may make it much easier, much faster for your project to move forward. You know, if you happen to be the person who knows 30 good politicians that are working at the national level, you know, you can produce a political documentary really quickly. And if you're producing a political film, you could probably rope those people into appearing for little vignettes in your film, you know, tiny little interviews. Just as a lark, you might be able to bring those people in. That would make your film more valuable because you're bringing in these high value elements that you just happen to have access to. So the stuff that I'm going to be talking about in this particular event, one of the reasons I'm covering it is to make it so you understand what specifically wonderful assets or resources you personally bring to the table that not everybody else has, and also some of the disabilities that you may have due to your background or due to the project you've chosen to do or due to the choices that you've made previously. It really is the case that some of the creative and business choices you make or have made might make your project much harder to produce. My objective is to sort of help you see a soup to nuts overview of this process of producing a big budget project so you can think really clearly and efficiently about how to move your particular project or projects forward. Now, you're going to have to do due diligence on every single person that you work with. When you're the producer, you are responsible for providing a safe and legal and productive working environment for every single person on the set and every single person involved in the production. That's you. It's all you. It's 100% you that does that thing. No one else in the company is responsible for doing that. And the whole world is going to hold you personally accountable for your project being safe, legal, and productive. The only way that you can make it so your production meets that requirement is by doing due diligence on every single person that you're bringing on board the project. If you don't do that homework, then you don't know who you're exposing people on your set, or who you're exposing your investors, or who you're exposing your talent to, and you could make a mistake that actually gets people hurt, or gets people robbed from, or that brings your project down so nobody gets paid. So due diligence is like a key part of your job. You should think of your company as sort of a private club. And in order to become a member, you have to be vetted very thoroughly. This workshop there's one of the resources that comes with your resources as a VIP Pro or as a person who's purchased this workshop. One of the resources in there talks about due diligence, and it talks about, you know, who you might choose to work with in terms of legal professionals or people that do background checks in order to find out who people are but prior to hiring them. You personally are going to have to take responsibility for hiring people to do due diligence and or doing due diligence on your own to ensure that folks are safe. The least you're ever going to do, first of all, I recommend that when you're hiring people or engaging people for anything, you try to find 5 or 6 good candidates for literally every single position on your project. If you need to have a line producer, which you almost certainly will, you want to have 5 or 6 candidates who worked on similar projects to yours at your budget level recently, and you want to do in-depth, you want to like research them very carefully. You want to Google them and see how their projects did. You want to ask them for references. You want to call up their references, and you want to make sure that they said working with this line producer was great. You're going to go then do due diligence on the people that you got recommendations from, because most people in this industry have 5 friends who are willing to lie for them. You're going to go ahead and see if there are BBB, Better Business Bureau complaints about them, if it's a service that you're thinking about using, or if people have like scams or riff-raff reports that they've filed on them. You're going to check their credits on IMDb. You're going to look in, and you're going to look or hire somebody to help you look to see if they've been sued, if there's litigation for them. You're going to do this with every single person on your project. You're going to do it with attorneys. You're going to do it with accountants. You're going to do it. You're going to do this research on tax advisors. You're going to do this on line producers. You're going to do this on camera people. You're going to do this on makeup people. You're going to do this on actors and their agents. You're going to do this with literally everybody on your set. And again, as the value of your project goes up, the risks go up. The number of people involved goes up. The amount of money that you can lose or cost your investors goes up. So due diligence is one of the most important aspects of your job as a producer. Know who you're working with, know who you're exposing to other people that you've chosen to hire. The next thing I want to mention is that things on I'm going to be talking about a certain set of things, and I'll be making this resource available months and years going forward. I do retire content from time to time, but I never know when someone's going to be watching this. And also when I talk about these topics, you're going to remember what I've said, and you might think, well, I already know that because Nancy talked about it, or because some of the people that Nancy interviewed talked about a particular topic, so I know that. The truth is that everything changes. If you were to go to Amazon right now and you were to look at some of the most highly rated books up there, you would find a lot of them were written before the year 2000. And the vast majority of the information they provide is wholly out of date and fairly inapplicable today. Every piece of advice that you get and every piece of knowledge that you get, regardless of the source, is going to have a shelf life, because things are moving very quickly in the entertainment industry. Things are evolving very quickly. In the rise of the streaming services, the rise of virtual production technologies, the the changes brought about by COVID, the change in theatrical release, all of those things have really created a lot of change and turmoil in the market, and that pace of change is accelerating. A significant number of people, believe it or not, watch movies on their phones. They don't even have a big screen television at home, and they consume most of the media on their phone. Well, if you think about it, you're producing a film, and it might be the case that the best way for you to reach your customers is to release your project on some way that lets them watch it on their phone, and you get 100% of the revenue instead of having to share it with a distributor. Everything is changing so quickly. As a producer, you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, and that means that you're going to need to master the skills required to produce your particular kind of picture for your particular audience, and you're going to have to master new skills and new information and find new alternatives on an ongoing basis. That's actually part of your job. Creating a safe, legal, and productive working environment for everybody is your job. Doing due diligence to make sure that everybody that's on set and everybody that you work with is responsible, trustworthy, honest, does their job well is your job. And making sure that you keep up to date on the latest information is your job. All of these things are your job. To be a producer is to be the guy in charge of the project. And that entails all of these things. So let's start talking brass tacks about the general steps involved in building a $500K to $5 million film project. The first thing that you're going to do is something called development. And we've all heard about development. There's all these jokes about development. That people talk about development hell. And they talk about how projects fell apart in development. They talk about how something fell out of development, etc. They talk about how something didn't get greenlit because of development. So if you don't know what the word development means, it's a good time to find out, because it is the most critical step in your success. In a very meaningful way, if you get development wrong, there is literally no way for you to be successful going forward. The process of development is the process by which you make sure that producing the project you have in mind is a good investment of time and money that's likely to cover its costs, pay its investors, and pay producers. Development, we're going to dive deep in just a second about what's involved in development, but it involves acquiring the screenplay, vetting the screenplay to make sure that it's really good, getting a budget and shooting schedule so you know how much it actually costs to shoot the darn thing. It means doing film analytics and financial forecasts, accurate film analytics and financial forecasts to find out how much the thing is likely to generate in revenue and where that revenue is going to come from, what specific distributors, what specific buyers, what specific streaming services, etc. It's the process by which you figure out uh, whether or not you're likely to be able to get pre-sales. It's when you figure out if you are going to shoot in one of the tax advantage states like Georgia or New Mexico or New Orleans, etc., in order to get rebates that those states offer for people who bring them productions. It's when you do all of those calculations and go through the process of making sure of checking the feasibility of a project. And at the very end of the process, if it looks like development is good, then it's when you set up the companies and start putting the pieces together so you can actually move forward. After development, you get to the point where you actually know that you're going to go into production. And so you start the process of pre-production. And that's when you start actually hiring the personnel, the locations, acquiring the assets, the sets, the 3D models, whatever, uh, the post-production folks, etc., that are required to shoot and edit and release your film. Production is when you actually create the images and audio required to shoot your film, and you may shoot the media, using your own cameras, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and your own actors and your own cameramen and so forth. And you might also buy and license media created by others to incorporate into your project. For example, you may be shooting your um, $3 million film in a farmhouse, and you may have the farmhouse and you may have the area right around the farmhouse, but you may open with a car driving a drone picture of a car driving to the through fields of grain, and that may be stock footage. You may not actually create that footage, you may actually choose to buy it. A lot of people maximize the value of their money by purchasing intellectual property that was previously created to incorporate into their film project. You're going to do that probably as well, because it's a very good way to get a lot of production value for your work. There's no reason for you to go send a cameraman out to shoot water in a waterfall when there's about 4,000 million different waterfall um, footage uh, footage widely available to you through Pond 5 and through Getty and through a whole bunch of other companies. After you've gone through production, you're going to go into editing and post-production, which is where you take all this media, all these bits and pieces from all these sources, and you start blending them together to create your final film. And the end of that process is to create the specific deliverables that your film, um, based upon your film, for streaming services and broadcast buyers and distributors and so forth who've said, yes, I'll take your film or I'll license your film for sale or for distribution worldwide. The deliverables are very specific files that you actually have to deliver that have to meet very specific specifications. And your job is to hire people who actually understand those specifications, who can actually create exactly that, the content that distributors and buyers and broadcasters worldwide are expecting. It's not something, it's something you as a producer have to understand the fundamentals of, but it's not something that you're going to do on your home computer. Generally speaking, you might decide to edit your own little 10K project, your own little 20K or 50K project. But when it comes to editing at the 500K and $5 million level, unless you're a professional editor, you're going to pay somebody to do the editing. The final step is something called monetization. After you've produced the film and you've edited it and you've shipped it out to the people that have purchased it, you are going to start getting revenue back. And that revenue has to get paid back to the people who contributed to the project in a certain set of ways. Generally speaking, let's say if you're shooting a $5 million project and you elect to shoot it in Atlanta, and you're going to end up with like 30% of the money you spent there coming back to you as a film incentive or a rebate of some kind, the money that you get from the state is going to be paid first to the bank that you took loans from, mostly because they tend to lend you money based upon how much money you're likely to get back in incentives. And then when other money starts coming in from pre-sales that you've done, or when distributors actually start paying you, you're going to finish paying off the bank. Then you're going to pay the investors back the money that you owe them 100%. And then usually you give them a guaranteed return, like an additional 20%, let's say. And then after that, you're going to be splitting the money between you and the investors and anybody you gave a back end deal to, right? So you as a producer actually get paid last. The people who get paid first are going to, the big money is going to go to the banks and to the investors first, and then you're going to actually start seeing some of the profits from the project that you've produced. It could be the case that in your budget you've got a little salary that you pay yourself. You might pay yourself like $50,000 or $100,000 during the production of the film, but generally speaking, you don't make a huge amount of money. You're not The investors don't usually pay you a huge amount of money to produce a film, because their thinking is that you're supposed to be confident that the film's going to make a profit, and you're going to make your money when the film does make a profit. You're not going to make it from the money that the investors give you. That's not always the case, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about funding. But monetization is sort of the last step in the process, and it's where you dole out the money that's come in. You need to understand that when you're talking about a $500K to $5 million project, it's a multi-year process. You're not going to do this in 6 months. You're not going to do this in a year. You're not going to do this in 2 years. Going through this process, generally speaking, is going to take you 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years. So you really have to want to do it. Now, I say that specifically because a lot of people have very unrealistic expectations about how long it's going to take to develop a particular project and raise the money required for investment. If you happen to come from a very wealthy family, if you have access to a lot of investors, if you can if you actually own a lot of real estate and can borrow a lot of money from the bank without having to show them a lot of a lot of documentation. If you happen to know a lot of actors who are willing to work for free or cheap, and they happen to be named talent actors, it's possible that you can short circuit this process, and you might be able to get your project built, produced, and making money in a year or two. But for normal people, you're normally going to end up spending several years doing this process. That's one of the reasons why you have to really love your project. And just a note for the screenwriters that are attending, it's shocking how often I've talked to screenwriters who've said, I have a really good screenplay, but people don't want to buy it. Or, a lot of people have heard the pitch, they say it's really good, but nobody's offered to buy it, produce it. And it's like, you can have a really good script and people might not want to produce it because they're just not in love with it. If you're going to spend 3 years and you're going to take the risk of producing a project that's, $500K or $5 million, it's a lot of money. You have to really love it. You have to actually want to do it. You have to actually want to do the project very badly. So it's the reason that a good screenplay, you have to get the right screenplay to the right people, and the right people have to really love it and say, yes, I want to go ahead and produce this particular project. That's what makes them decide to spend the money and to take the time required to go through the development process and to go through the production process. When you're producing independent films at this budget level, it takes time, it takes money, it takes effort, it takes commitment. So it has to be something you really want to do. Generally speaking, this process does cost money up front. Generally, you have to have money in your little hand before you actually start diving into the project. So if you're producing a $1 million project, you probably want to have easy access, like in your hand access to $100,000 to $200,000. The reason is that as you go through the production process, you need to be able to pay people. You're going to need to make a deal for your screenplay. You need to be able to pay lawyers. You need to be able to pay tax advisors. You need to be able to if you're working to raise money from investors, you need to be able to pay securities attorneys. You need to be able to pay all these people. You also need to be able to pay the line producer who's going to produce your budget. You need to pay the people that do the film analytics and do the financial forecasts. There's just a bunch of cash that has to get spent. And when you start getting to the point where you think, okay, this project is starting to come together, and you start reaching out to talent, you need to be able to pay the casting director to give you advice on who you should be casting and be able to make offers for you. You probably want to be able to, often need a certain amount of money in order to tell the casting director, okay, I have money in the bank so that I can afford to pay him. If he decides, if this particular actor decides to come on board, you need to be able to pay for the um, the setting up the company, the corporation, the LLC or whatever, you need to be able, and that you're going to pay a lawyer to do that, because it's not like setting up just any old, not just any old LLC. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but setting up the LLC is important. You need 10 to 20% of your budget in your hand. So when you say that you're going to produce a $5 million film, start by finding $1 million, right? You need to start finding hunks of cash right away. The producing a film, $500K to $5 million, has a significant legal and financial risks. If you don't do things by the book and you don't do them carefully, and you decide to try to skip some of the laws, you might very well find that you've made yourself very easy to sue. If you've hired people illegally, you might find yourself getting to meet the state of California, which aggressively pursues people that choose not to pay other people. You might find yourself dealing with investors who report you to the SEC, which can be kind of an awkward situation because SEC is not a nice group of people when it comes to folks that they think have conducted scams or defrauded people. And you'll find that going through the process of producing a $500K to $5 million project is a lot easier if you've done a lot of small features beforehand, because during the process of doing small features like a 10K or 20K or 50K or 200K or 500K, like the smaller the project is, the more opportunity you have to experiment with, or it's, you're not spending so much money when you're doing like a 50K project or a 100K project. You can find a lawyer and you can go through the process of securing intellectual property. You can go through the process of finding somebody to shoot for the 2 or 3 days or 4 days that you're going to need to shoot for your particular film. You can hire actors who are not union the first time, and then you can work up to hiring union actors in your next project. It's the ability to sort of grow into doing larger projects by doing smaller projects is really important, because it helps you develop your team as well as develop your skills, as well as to develop your tolerance for panic, because in every film project, 500K to 5 million, there's going to be moments, there's going to be days where it looks like the project's going to fall apart. When you're setting up these kinds of companies, generally speaking, you get together, you do a project, and then you all go your separate ways. And whenever that happens, because a company is only together for a short time, it's possible that people can get really mad. They could not want to work with each other. It could be the case that you've accidentally incorporated somebody who's really bad on the project and you have to spend months getting rid of them. It's like horrible things can happen. So if you're a seasoned producer and you've sort of gone through the process of producing multiple films, you get kind of tolerance. Like you're not scared. You don't make a certain set of mistakes. You're much more comfortable than if the first project you ever do is like a $3 million budget project. The last thing I want to mention is sometimes people think, well, I don't think I'm talented enough to make a profitable $200,000 production. I just, it seems so hard. You don't really have enough money. How can you be sure you're going to make a profit? So I think I need to have a bigger budget in order to make sure that my film's going to be profitable. The truth is, spending more does not guarantee that your film's going to earn more. It is definitely the case that if you are going to produce a if you're going to produce a $3 million project or a $5 million project, it might be the case that the $5 million project has a slightly better chance of making its money back, maybe because it can afford better talent or because it can afford better production values, etc. But that assumes that the $5 million is correctly spent. That's not a guarantee. So the best thing you can possibly do is ensure that you have the skills required to spend your money well. And one way that you master those skills is by doing smaller projects and then working up to doing larger projects instead of trying to start at the top. So now let's talk just for a few minutes about development. If you get development wrong, your film's going to cost a lot. It might never get made. So you might go through the process of paying for development and then never actually end up making the film. It might get made but never released because there's a problem with the intellectual property that you acquired or didn't acquire in development. It might get released, but it might never generate a profit. That happens pretty frequently because you can certainly make that cowboy science fiction show, but it's not guaranteed that everybody's going to buy the cowboy science fiction show. It could be the case that it generates a profit, but subsequently involves you in years of litigation, because your contracts are screwed up, and you promised multiple people certain percentages of the royalties that add up to well over 100%. And, all of a sudden, because you have this conflict in your contracts, people sue you because you sold them something that that didn't exist. You said that you could, 10 people were going to be able to have 30% of the profits. And it's like, well, that's 300% of the profits. There's no way that that's ever going to work. So good development is critical because it basically ensures that none of those things happen. What development does, the process of development, is it determines whether or not your film is feasible to produce. And it helps you decide whether or not you should be making this particular film. You take a look at what the screenplay is. It good enough? Is it actually good enough? Is it well written enough? It does it is it content, the film that's going to be based on the screenplay, the kind of content that there's a large market for, and can you reach that market? What's the budget for the project, and can the film at this budget about this topic make money? And if so, how much money can it make? For example, a lot of times people say, well, I want to do this costume drama. Costume dramas are, generally speaking, very expensive because costumes are very expensive and the sets tend to be very expensive. That's not necessarily as true as it used to be, because now you can use virtual production to create three-dimensional environments. So maybe things are getting better from that perspective. But if you, it used to be the case, people would come to producers with a screenplay that was a costume drama, and producers would immediately say, nope, I don't want to make that film, because they knew that if they produced it, the amount of revenue they could earn on a costume drama was not much more than the cost of making the film. So they wouldn't make a profit because people just didn't like costume dramas that much. You also figure out what talent and crew is going to be required to make the project profitable. You also determine the market for this particular film, including not just who the audience is, like 18 to 25 people who like Dungeons and Dragons, but what distributors and streaming companies and overseas buyers have that market in their back pocket. You also figure out what financial resources are available. If you have buyers or distributors who are interested in your project based upon the budget and the screenplay and who you plan to make the stars of the film and so forth, and who's going to be directing, what minimum guarantees are they willing to give you? It's harder and harder to get minimum guarantees. It's harder and harder for people to get distributors to say, yes, I will give you, if you give me this film that you have currently said that you're going to produce, I guarantee that I will pay you this amount of money upon receipt. But a lot of times when you want to get financing from a bank, that's exactly what you need to get those folks, the distributors, to say. You need to find out if there are film incentives available. If you're going to be producing a $5 million project, chances are you're going to be producing it in one of the high incentive states, because it will give you a certain percentage of your budget back immediately. So if I decide I want to produce in New Mexico, I take my $5 million project to New Mexico and I spend, let's say, $4 million of my budget there. I might be able to get as much as $1 million back just because I chose to shoot in New Mexico. So as your budget goes up, you're more and more likely to shoot in different states because it helps you guarantee a certain percentage of your income on the film. And that means that's a whole bunch of tickets that you don't have to sell. That's a whole bunch of distribution you don't have to sell. The next question you have to ask yourself is how much the bank will lend you based upon the incentives and the minimum guarantees you've got from buyers. You're going to, as you go through development, you create a series of documents. Obviously you acquire the screenplay, you acquire the budget, the shooting schedule, and so forth. You probably hire somebody to do film analytics and create the financial forecasts and the review how the money's going to come in terms of cash flow and in terms of what the revenue sources will be, which buyers, which streamers, and so forth. And you take that to the bank, and the bank says, okay, having seen all of this, and I'm willing to give you 80% of 80% of the money you're getting back from rebates and 70% of the money that you're getting back from minimum guarantees. And you go, oh, okay. So because the bank's willing to lend me that amount of money at, whatever interest rate, that means that investors will have to be the ones that provide me with the rest of the money, unless you happen to have it in your back pocket. And so you'll go to investors and you'll say that of my $5 million film, $1 million is being paid for by tax incentives, and I've got pre-sales for another 1.5 million. So I now need you to provide me, Mr. Investor, with $2.5 million in investment. And you might get one investor, you might get a dozen investors, you might allow your audience to become investors. Like if you were doing a Dungeons and Dragons movie, you might decide to do a regulation CF placement that targets Dungeons and Dragons and people and saying, hey, do you want to fund Dungeons and Dragons movie? And you can allow them to buy shares in your project. So all of this thinking about how you're going to produce your project and all of these facts are done during the development process. If the development process goes well and it seems feasible, very likely that your film will be very profitable, you will decide that you're going to go forward and you will go through the steps of setting up your company and negotiating your key deals with the bank and with the producers, reps, or sales agents who are going to be selling your work to all of these buyers or distribution companies. And you're going to start raising money from your investors, and you're going to start putting money into a bank account that you can actually use to roll into production. So this development stage is where you determine whether or not you're going to go forward or not go forward. And it's where if you do decide to go forward, at the very end of the process, it's when you start setting up your company and making the deals so that you can roll into pre-production. Once you dive into pre-production, basically your job, usually during the development process, you're only going to hire or engage or get agreements from the key crew, like your director, perhaps your DP, perhaps your post-production supervisor, maybe your production designer. You're going to get those people on board because they're key to your production, and because investors might want to know who they are. And you're probably going to engage one or two lead actors. And when you're working at, at these budget levels, chances are good you're going to be working with SAG actors. So you'll have to become a SAG signatory. Your production company will sign the SAG agreements and will agree to abide by all of their rules. And they may have to actually put up a bond that basically where you set aside the money for the actors that you plan to hire that happen to be SAG actors. You'll set aside that money during the development and early pre-production process. As you go through pre-production, you basically engage all of the cast, get the rest of the crew together, get the locations together, get the production accounting up and running so you can pay everybody. And you basically just get all the prep together so that you can roll into full production. This is during this time period, during pre-production, is when you get the producer, the directors, like, the director and the DP, director of photography, etc., designers, everybody together so they can talk and they can sort of walk through what the production's going to be and get everybody all synced up to ensure that everybody's producing the same picture, everybody knows what it's supposed to look like, everybody's able to work as a team as efficiently as possible. Then you roll into proper production. That's when you and your team all start producing the project the film that you're trying to make. Your objective is to run a swift, sane, legal production company, because if you run illegal productions, they tend to get shut down. And if your film gets shut down during production, it's actually the worst possible case, because chances are it's never going to be finished, and all the money that's been put into it is a dead weight loss. During this process, you'll be looking at dailies, where you take a look at what was produced each day. And usually people sort of these days start sort of getting the editors and post-production supervisor on board so they can start cutting the film together during the production process. Because if it turns out that you need a different camera angle, or if it turns out that a particular performance didn't quite work, or if it turns out that you got bad audio on a given day, it's better to be able to go back and shoot it while everybody's still there at the same set where it was originally captured, than to have to come back, days or months later. During this process, you're going to be collecting receipts, you're going to be paying people, you're going to be providing updates to investors. You're also going to be doing marketing operations, like you'll have cameramen walking around your set, recording behind the scenes stuff, doing interviews, because this information is something you'll be feeding to the press going forward in order to make them want to cover your particular project, right? That's how you end up with interviews with Russell Crowe on the set of one of his projects, talking about uh, the Second World War and Australia's involvement in it. It's because somebody's on set while they're filming that particular film and they record an interview with him. So that kind of footage is being created during production. And you also have teams, the post-production, you have teams that are already working to get more pre-sales. And those are producers, reps, or sales agents that are actually going out, telling people about your film, taking some of the footage that you've created, um, and they're showing it to people. And they're saying, hey, isn't this good? Isn't this good? Isn't this good? Wouldn't you want to, are you interested in uh, pre-buying the rights for this particular project? And if it's looking really good, you'll do a lot of your sales, pre-sales, actually during production. As you finish production, uh, what happens is you kind of pack up your little party. Like if you were shooting in Georgia, you would say goodbye everybody, send everybody home, and then your line producer likely will stay on for a while, and they'll be working with the state government to show them all the receipts, show them all the accounting, etc. And they'll end up getting a check for the incentives that the state agrees that they owe you, whether it's a film rebate or whatever. And then meanwhile, you're you'll have returned all the rented equipment, and you'll have done everything so that basically the production phase of your company is sort of shut down. And then you'll be moving into the post-production phase. And we'll go ahead and go. Boop. So in post-production, you've got the editors and the directors and everybody are building the film from all of the footage that you've created and all of the content you purchased and licensed. And they're doing all the color correction, and they're doing all the audio to make sure that the special effects are what they're supposed to be, to make sure that the dialogue is on one audio track and the music is on another audio track, and that you own the music that you're licensing, or have legally licensed the music and can use it in your film. You're going to be creating rough cuts, and you're going to be showing them to people. You might have an audience of 50 who comes in to watch your movie and gives you feedback, and they say, I really hate the ending, or I really hated this character. And you'll go back and you'll take your footage and you'll recut it, and you'll bring in another audience and see if the comments are better. And hopefully you'll have a chance to do that 2 or 3 or 4 times, because a lot of times it's those rough cuts that actually take the film and turn it into something that people really enjoy. At that same time, you're going to be creating trailers that your producers, reps, or sales agents use to go out and get more pre-sales. And people that have already decided to buy your film or distributors, if one or more distributors or buyers have decided to buy your film, they'll be taking these little trailers and they'll be showing it to the people that they sell to and saying, hey, Mr. Broadcaster in Spain, do you want this particular film? Or hey, Mr. Broadcaster in China, do you want this particular film? And they'll be able to do that because they have these trailers that your team is developing. Your team will create the final deliverables required by all the companies that you've licensed or sold the content to. And that includes finished media files, and it includes all the captioning that you need for different languages. And it will include all of the posters, etc., that you said that you're going to provide them with. And you basically deliver all of the stuff that you're supposed to deliver. And once that's done, you start getting paid. We're into monetization. You repay the bank loans first, almost always. It's hard to imagine how the bank would ever give you a loan if you didn't promise to pay them first. Then you repay your investors, and you usually give them a little bit more than they invested. So if they invested $1 million, you might give them $1.2 million before you start getting paid. Finally, you as a producer and start getting paid, and you start paying the people you have back-end deals with. Usually what happens is you and the investors sort of split the money that comes in. So if $1 comes in and we owe 3% to the writer, then we'll take the dollar that comes in, we'll give 30 cents of the dollar to the writer, and then maybe 2% to the lead actor we said that we wanted to give it back into. And then you and the investors will be splitting the rest of the money 50-50. So if you've never sort of understood the process by which a film is made, that's the process. That's the step-by-step process for how a big film is made. And you really do have to do it in that order. You must do development before you do pre-production, before you do production, before you do post-production, before you do monetization. You have to do it in that order, because it could well be the case when you go through the development process that you discover very early on, after you spend only like $10,000 or $15,000, this is a bad project. There is no way for this thing to make money. I want to do something about um, a cowboy ballerina, and there have been no successful cowboy ballerina films in the history of the world. And there's no way that I'm going to be able to get investors or distributors to give me money for a cowboy ballerina film. You need to know that so you don't go forward with producing the project. When somebody says my picture fell out of development, what they're saying is that they started to go through the process of determining whether or not the film should be made, and they discovered it was fatally flawed. And they said, I don't want to produce this film because there's no way I'm going to make money on it. That's what producers do. They go through the process of economically vetting the film prior to rolling into production. That's your job. Is to determine whether or not the film is going to be a good investment for you and for all the other people who are going to be working on it. So this particular event is actually specifically mentions the fact that there are strategies that producers use when they're producing projects at this budget level. And I'm going to mention a few of them because I think it's helpful to know that there are things you can do right off the bat that might make your film more likely to be successful in going through development, going through production, going through distribution, and turning it, getting monetized. So here's some content strategies. One thing you can do to make sure that your project is going to be more successful is base your project on a book or a comic book or an event or an organization that already has a huge following. It's not an accident that Cameron decided to do a project about the Titanic. The Titanic is a very interesting event for a huge number of people worldwide. A whole bunch of people go on an unsinkable ship, they hit an iceberg, and the rich women live. The rich men go down with the ship along with a whole bunch of poor people, and there's no lifeboats because somebody decided the ship was unsinkable. That's just an interesting story. It's known worldwide. Everybody finds it interesting. So one of the reasons Titanic was so successful was because it was a film, a fictional story based on a real world event that people found really interesting. When somebody finds a whole huge market, finds a particular topic interesting or a particular time interesting, it makes it much easier for you to market your project. It has sort of an immediate audience waiting for it. And distributors know that. If 1 million people are willing to spend $10 on your film, it's going to generate $10 million. Now, remember, your production's not going to get to keep that $10 million because you are working with distributors. You are working with a whole bunch of other people who are going to take a piece. But my point is, if you're doing something on an entirely original property and you're talking about something that nobody has ever heard of or has ever cared about, like a cowboy ballerina, you're in a really bad position because you really, honest to God, do not have a market waiting for the project that you're planning to produce. Build your project on something that people have a natural interest in. The next thing we're going to talk about is you want to base your project on unique assets, skills, resources, personnel that you personally have easy access to. If you and 30 film friends go hiking in the Himalayas every year, you can create quite a Himalayas film. And you might be the only people that can create a Himalayas film, right? Nobody else is going to the Himalayas every year. Not very many people ever get to go to the Himalayas. So if you, because you have something unique about you, can take people to the Himalayas or to the Andes in Peru or to the Carnival in Brazil or deep into the Amazon rainforest or to deserted desert islands, if you have the capacity to take people to these unique locations, unique places, give them these unique experiences, that sets you above. That gives you a significant advantage because you're taking people to someplace they can't normally get to. That's very cool that they want to go to. The third content strategy is test the market for your film by creating a book or a documentary or some other media you can market. Don't guess whether or not you're going to be able to find people that are interested in your particular project. You can test that by creating content that's very cheap and then marketing that. And then If that's easy to market, then your film's going to be easy to market. If you can make a book, a book that's successful on a particular topic, and that turns a profit, your film's going to turn a profit as well. That's one of the reasons why people tend to buy successful books to turn into films, because they know that there's a market ready and waiting for that particular project. The next thing is carefully study very recent profitable films that are very similar to your project and see who were their distributors, who were their buyers, who were the aggregators, which we'll talk about later, that worked on the content, who was the key cast, who was the key crew. See if you can theoretically see if it's possible to duplicate what people did right on films that were successful. If you're doing something like, if you're shooting a film like a horror film, a $5 million horror film, like The Conjuring, or like Annabelle, or like the Ouija board, or you're doing something along those lines, you you do worse than to go ahead and take a look at people who've worked on those projects or similar projects recently, because they know for a fact what works and what does not work for that genre. They know what success looks like and how to create it. And one of the one of the sets of resources you have is in your set of resources talks about bankability. And there's a company called Nash Information Systems, which runs a huge database of sort of thousands and thousands, like I forget how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people they keep track of in the entertainment industry. All the projects are on, all the roles they played, DP versus camera assistant versus first AD, etc. And they've actually measured how much money those films made, and they can tell you in horror, in horror films in budgets between 3 million and 5 million, these um, five these five camera guys have been associated with the highest profitable films, right? So they can tell you how quote unquote bankable it is. How much being bankable means, if I invest $1 in hiring this particular person, I get $1.50 back, or $2.50 back, or $10 back. And I mentioned in passing one time I was talking to Bruce Nash in one of the interviews, and I said, so, who's the most unexpectedly important person, like the best bang for your buck? And he goes, well, it's interesting. Sound designers on horror films are very important. They tend to be relatively low paid, and yet they seem to people that hire sound designers, particularly good sound designers, tend to get the maximum, the highest quality of back end revenue. So they're a good investment, and it's something to look into. So taking a look at those things is a good way to go. Finally, if you create projects that really benefit from purchased or licensed footage, that's a good thing. When talking about doing war films and so forth, take advantage of stuff that already exists. Don't reinvent the wheel. Do not shoot dogfights if you can buy dogfights, that have been previously shot or that were shot in the real world. And then do take a look at using new production techniques like virtual production. And that's also some of the resources you have access to. It is possible to shoot, to set your actors on a green stage and to put a fully interactive digital environment around them, and to shoot effects in real time, as well as to shoot camera motions in real time. You learn more about that by taking a look at the virtual production stuff that is in the resources that come with this particular workshop. When it comes to cast and crew strategies, you're going to research, interview, vet, and hire people who have recently and frequently done the work that you want them to do. You do not want to hire somebody who's a first-time director for your horror film at the $5 million budget level. It's just a huge risk. You don't want to hire somebody who has never been a line producer on a $3 million film. Like they've never done what a line producer is. You don't want to hire that guy. You want to hire an actual real live line producer that does line producing for a living, and you want them to have previously worked on the kinds of projects you're working on. You are going to have to work at $500,000 level. Gets pretty certain you're going to be working with SAG, and when you're hiring SAG actors, you're going to have to obey SAG rules. It's very important that you do that. It can be very problematic for you if you don't, because SAG can shut down your production. It's important to note that when you're hiring name talent, it's UFC. There's all kinds of people, like everybody that's in sports at the highest level, the SAG signatory people, UFC fighters, past politicians, important religious figures. All of these people have huge names. They have huge followings. They're very newsworthy, very press-worthy, very interesting to their motivated fans. And incorporating them into your projects makes your projects more profitable. I've known people who created Christian projects who have got Christian leaders to appear in their feature films, or people who were writing Christian books, and it's made the film a lot more successful because the person that was in the film that they invited to be in the film actually uh, told people about it, and more importantly, the filmmaker, when they were doing advertising, mentioned all of these names of all these leaders, religious leaders that were in the project. And in fact, if you look at The Secret, that particular film drops the names of a huge number of spiritual leaders, and it was one of the reasons that the film was very well thought of, or very popular and very made a lot of money, was because it incorporated all of these leaders. If you might see a description of it and you might say, oh, I didn't realize she was in that thing, I'm going to go watch it because if she's in it, it must be good. It's kind of an endorsement. If you hire good keys, like a good director, first AD, or line producer, post-production supervisor, if you hire those people carefully, you'll find that they tend to bring with them people that they've worked with in the past who are very, very good. And the other thing is, when you bring them aboard, because they are full board professionals, they'll know when somebody's useless, and they'll go, yeah, that guy, I don't like that guy. You get rid of him because he's a jerk and he's kind of costing us money, and I hate working with him. They can tell who's good. They can tell who's not good. They're straightforward about telling you when people are jerks, and they'll also tell you when you're not measuring up, which I think can be very valuable. When your first AD and your director take you aside and go, you know what? You're interfering with our production. We can't get any work done. You're making it impossible. They're giving you information that you need to know so that you'll stop doing it, so that your film that you've invested your life in and that it's critical to your success going forward is good, because they'll tell you, hey, stop it. You're screwing things up. I can't work like this. So if you're not very experienced, surrounding yourself with a good experienced team that knows what they're doing is a good way to rein you in and to rein in other people that you'll be working with on your project. They help you create the environment that you want, the safe, legal, effective production environment that you want. There are a few strategies that you really do need to avoid as well. Do not try to save money by avoiding lawyers, tax advisors, accountants, etc. These people exist to advise and protect you. One of the things that makes me most uncomfortable is when somebody says, hey, does anybody have releases that I can use? Or does anybody have uh, uh, contracts I can use to hire a writer? Or does anybody know, I need to do an option agreement. Does anybody have an option agreement that I can buy? No. Go get your own lawyer. Tell him about the production that you're actually producing, and make sure that the contract that he creates for you is accurate and enforceable, because you're going to be building a whole company based upon these documents. You're going to be creating these agreements, and you need to be able to count on those documents to do what they're supposed to do. It's important that when you have a contract with a particular writer, that's enforceable, and that it covers how much they're going to get paid under all circumstances. When you don't have that kind of option agreement, when it's just a crazy $1 option agreement that doesn't set the maximum price for the project, you don't know how much your script is going to cost. And you can go through the development process based upon this particular project. You can spend $10, $20, $50,000 on that development project, assuming you have that script, only to find out that the writer wants another $200,000 in order to let you have it. Why? Because you have built your whole production around something that you don't own, or that you don't have a true option on. You do not want to try to avoid hiring people legally. Calling somebody a 1099 contractor does not make them one. Calling them a volunteer does not make them one. There are rules about this. You want to hire people legally. Lawyers advise you on that. Don't show investors your business plan and ask for checks. Raise money legally with advice from securities attorneys. You cannot go door to door with your business plan, show it to people, and ask investors to write you checks. It's illegal. You're violating securities laws. You need to actually work with an attorney to make sure that what you're doing when you're raising money is legal. And the interesting thing is, At the beginning, it may look like it works just fine. And why wouldn't I just, why wouldn't I just do this thing that's so easy? Because the answer is that when people lose their money, or 3 years after the event, when people get mad, the fact that you haven't obeyed the law is what's going to get you involved with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So you want to obey the law because not because you're going to have trouble today, but because you're going to have trouble 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. You don't want trouble lying in wait for you that long. Don't try to set up your own production company. You have to work with an attorney and a tax advisor and people with entertainment industry experience to set up your production, because there are details in setting up your company that really matter. For example, if you have an LLC and you have an operating agreement, the operating agreement talks about what each individual in the company, it talks about how the company is going to run. And it talks about specific rules about when investment comes in, et cetera, when investors can take their money out, how, if people can cancel their investment. It talks about this huge number of things that are really important to the success of your company overall. So you need to have your LLC set up correctly for the work that you're planning to do with your LLC. Just using a standard set of documents doesn't guarantee that you're going to have the protection that you need in running your particular company. So if you can't afford to pay for an attorney and a tax advisor and so forth to help set up your production company, you probably shouldn't be producing at this level, because you could run into real financial and legal problems. The next thing I want to mention is the credibility is critical. You personally are going to be under a microscope. Everybody who works with you is going to, before they work with you, is going to Google you. Investors, many of them are going to run background checks on you. They're going to know if you've had a bankruptcy. They may forgive you for it, but they're going to know if you've had a bankruptcy. They're going to know if you own your own home. They're going to know if you've had previous businesses before. They're going to know if you've lied about this, that, and this third thing. You got to be credible. Also, your key cast and crew are going to be vetting you as well. They're going to be looking at you. They're going to ask around about you. So if you've got skeletons in your closet, rest assured that they will be found. They will always be found. It's shocking how quickly they will be found, especially when things go wrong. So it might be the case everybody cuts you slack and doesn't do their due diligence until they've been working with you for a while. Then when the project goes off the rails, all of a sudden, then they do their due diligence, and then they're mad because you didn't disclose something that they needed to know. You need to really get in the habit of under-promising and over-delivering, and you want to make sure that people you work with do the same thing. Don't tell somebody that you're going to get back to them in 2 days if you're not going to get back to them for a week. Don't tell people that you're going to come back to them with money in a week if you're not going to come back to them for 2 months. Do not say money's in the, you've got investors lined up when you don't have less investors lined up. Do not tell investors that you have talent lined up when you don't have talent lined up. Don't lie, because you will be caught. And every single time you get caught in that lie, people think you're less credible. And that means they're less willing to trust you. And that means they're less willing to take risks on your behalf. You're going to work very hard to be polite and to be calm and to be measured and to be practical and to be reliable and to be firm and to be professional. You set the tone for your entire company. If you are in a company and you notice everybody's acting crazy and nobody's being reliable, that's because you're acting crazy and you're not being reliable. Generally speaking, fish rots from the head down. In order to fix that problem, you usually have to fire a whole bunch of people, and that's expensive and time consuming. So you set the tone for your company. Running a production company requires you to be a leader. It becomes very expensive when you are not reliable or you're not credible. You have to be ready, willing, and able and empowered to fire people. You have to feel comfortable firing people for failure to perform. Usually it just means you look at someone and you go, this isn't working out. You're not very happy, are you? And they go, no. And you go, how about if this is your last day? And they go, okay. And you go, fine. It's like, I've enjoyed working with you. Maybe next time. And they go away, and maybe you work with them on some other project that's better. But meanwhile, you stick somebody else in. That's another reason why you need to vet 5 people for every sort of key position and for almost all your positions, because at any given time, you may have to kick off somebody that's been working as part of your team and replace them with somebody else. It's good to have the names of 5 camera guys, 5 directors, 5 production designers, 5 post-production supervisors, 5 great editors. It's good to have that because it means that when you want to replace people, you have a list of people that you say, well, you know, I was talking to you about this project. This guy left. I'd like to put you on to replace him. You can do that if you've created, if you've done due diligence on a bunch of people and you know that they could have worked out. You need to keep track. You need to make sure that you have contracts with everybody on your project that allows you to fire them and allows you to terminate them when they fail to perform. You need to keep track of what everyone is doing and keep in contact with every member of your team. You want to know as soon as possible when things go wrong. You need to create a culture where if there's a problem, the first thing people do is talk about it. They don't say, and they don't have to get mad about it. A good season, if you create a good team, they're aware of problems, but they don't panic when there's problems. Like they may say, hey, you know, we're planning on shooting at this particular barn, and it turns out that that barn burned down, and we have to be there in 2 days. So that's going to be a problem. You don't want people to panic about that. You want them to be able to say, okay, so we have another place that's like this other farmhouse that's lined up. What we're going to do is we're going to shift everything around. We're going to shoot there first. And then we need to have people, we need to get a couple of location manager and one of the cameras, the camera assistants to go out and find us a barn that's close to that we can actually use to stand in for this particular scene, right? You need people to know that there's a problem, to realize that things have to get done quickly, and to calmly move to handle it. What you don't want is for people to panic, start yelling, get mad, start blaming one another, because the issue is, how are we going to move this forward? It's okay when people go, you screwed up, this is your fault. And the person that did screw up should say, yep, all me, I'm bad. You know, I'm going to screw up at least 5 or 6 more times on this project. So sorry. And then, but I did screw up, and let's move on. Now what are we going to do to fix it? And to move on from there. What you don't want is for people to hide their mistakes or for people to blame people who were not at fault just because they don't want to be in trouble. And that is the culture that you create by being a responsible, creditable person and by hiring professional people to work with. It's always important to understand that you personally are the most at-risk person financially for the project that you're producing. You personally are at risk. You're responsible for running a legal, safe production environment, and you're responsible for people behaving rationally and for the whole team being effective. And if anybody gets hurt, anybody gets killed, everybody loses their money, ultimately it's your fault. So your job is to make that not happen. Having said all that, it pays to remember that whether you're producing a 50K or a 500K or a $5 million project, producing a film is literally about generating about 90 good minutes of screen time. You're literally trying to make 90 good minutes. And if you can just remember that, if you could just focus on that, it is really a lifesaver. Because a lot of times people get so caught up in all these mechanics of hiring people and getting folks on board and you know, getting the right talent on, et cetera. They get so caught up in this minutia that they lose track of the fact that all I want is 90 good minutes. I need that guy for 4 minutes. I need him to create 4 minutes of content. I need him for a cameo. It's like, how quickly can we make that happen? And if you, it's nice to be able to think, well, I was going to do this. I had this idea for my 90 minutes. This is exactly what I was going to create. But now I'm going to say that getting this 4 minutes of footage is going to be way too hard. So I'm going to go get these 4 minutes of footage instead. And you change the script to make it so you can actually get the 4 minutes that you need that's cheap and easy instead of the 4 minutes that's hard. Focusing on the fact that you want to create 90 good minutes makes things easier. When people talk about all the money in a project getting up on screen, they're referring to the idea that as long as your project is safely, legally, and ethically produced, all that matters is what the audience sees and what they fall in love with on the screen. It's only what's on the screen that matters. Spending more on your projects doesn't make you a better producer or necessarily result in a better 90 minutes worth of content. It is perfectly possible to spend $5 million on a project and not have any better minutes than somebody who spent $3 million on it. It's totally possible to do that. People do that all the time. A producer who can spend $1 million and generate $100 million is a pretty great producer. And he would not be a better producer if he spent $10 million on the same project. So when I'm talking to, you know, people that come to my events, and I know this is true for other people I work with in the industry, when we hear people come and say, hey, I'm doing a $30 million project, our first question is why, for God's sake? And, you know, because 30 million is an awkward number. And two, for the love of God, what was the last thing you produced? Have you produced anything over $1 million? What are those credits? I need to see some proof that you can produce anything. And also, what makes you think a $30 million budget is better than a $1 million budget, or a $2 million budget, or a $5 million budget? Like, do you think that just because you're spending more money, you're a better producer, or a more important producer, or a more interesting producer? You're not. What matters to me is what you're producing and what the likelihood is that you're going to produce a good profit. If you tell me I have a $1 million project, and I produced a $1 million project and I earned $100 million at the box office, I'm going to think you're a rock star. I'm not going to think that you're a rock star just because you say you're doing a $30 million project. Bragging about how much your project is worth doesn't make you seem smart. It makes you seem naive. Practice really does make perfect. The first production people do is almost always a huge struggle. The first project you do is going to be a dumpster fire. If you have not previously produced something cheap, you do not know that it is going to be a dumpster fire, but it is. And the first expensive project, if your first project you do is $1 million, a $5 million, or a $2 million, a $5 million project, it's going to be a dumpster fire. The first project you do is a dumpster fire. So don't make the first project an expensive project, make it a cheap project. Do 2 or 3 or 4 cheap projects so you get good at them, and you are very good at actually getting them out the door. They go out the door, they make a little bit of money, or at least they make their money back. And when you can do that, start going up to bigger and bigger projects, because then you know how to make a project successful. Then you know what you need to have in place. You have certain team members that you rely on. You know for a fact that you can get stuff onto you can create the deliverables that you need to get onto Amazon or get onto Apple. Start by creating projects that you can get out the door, and that you know that you can't fail at, and that they can be a struggle, but they'll get done. Or if worse comes to worse, you can abandon them and go, okay, that was so much of a dumpster fire, I'm not even going to bother to fix it. I'm going to go on to my next project, and it's going to go better because I won't make the mistakes I did in that first terrible thing. Practice makes perfect. Experiment by doing smaller projects, so when you do the larger projects, you're less likely to fail. So there's a whole bunch of resources that are in the list of resources that come with this particular event. I strongly urge you to make sure you review the legal ones, with Justin Sterling talking about avoiding litigation, contract fundamentals, fair use and the right of publicity, etc. The reason is the legal stuff is going to be very important to you. You need to understand those things because you need to be conversant when you're talking to your lawyer. You need to be able to ask the right questions. You need to know when you're accidentally involving yourself in a contract. Do take a look at the shooting stuff on green screens. If you don't know how to shoot on green screen, learn about it. Learn about the virtual production stuff, because there are new options for producing content. Do learn about how to do take a look at the stuff for how to sell film rights in 170 countries. Do take a look at the information about aggregators. Do dive deep into making film budgets. And there's interviews with line producers, as well as with people that do film analytics and film forecasts, financial forecasts. Do take a look at those things. So you can start looking at all the resources that come with your come with the workshop, because they will help you become grounded in the language and in the thought processes involved in actually producing at this higher budget level. So let's see. With all that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and say, if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And I'm also more than happy to answer questions via email. I would just, one more thing I'll mention is that I'm doing follow-up events. If you've been watching my marketing, you know that I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to do a bonus session on fundamentals of funding your projects. And I think another one I'm doing is on distribution and so forth. So take a look at the other events I have coming up. You will automatically get invited to those events, and you will automatically get the recordings that I create that support them. So with that in mind, let's go take a look at the Q&A. So Sam asks, what's the name of the company that talks about bakeability? And that's Nash Information Systems, Bruce Nash. And there's actually a set of resources that come with this event. There's a thing where a whole interview I did with them on bankability. And you can it's very cost effective actually. And they will provide you with multiple they will provide you with a report. If you tell them about the film that you're creating, they will find you the most bankable people, for director, da 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 da. And that will, it just really, it's nice. The information is interesting, and it's the kind of information like the financial forecasts and like the film analytics that you can actually include in the business plan instead of resources that you disclose to investors along with your private placement memorandum or along with the Regulation CF documentation that you do. So on places like Box Office Mojo, it says if the box office for a movie is 30 million, does that refer to gross theater receipts or profits from all sources, merchandise, video, etc.? If you take a look at I think it usually sort of explains what it means. I believe that refers only to, on Box Office Mojo specifically, I think that refers only to what came in at at theatrical box offices, but I wouldn't bet my life on it. I do know that when you get professional film analytics done, they give you revenue from all sources and they tell you how much revenue came from each source. It is important to realize that when you do a theatrical release, it makes me laugh even saying the words. When you used to be, I'm going to talk about, we're going to pretend this is 2018 for 5 minutes. So let's pretend it's 2018. I would be telling you that if you did a theatrical release, you would expect that to be something that you didn't make any money on. So even if even if you produced a $5 million film and it earned 15 million at the box office, you wouldn't get any money really out of it. Most of it would, if you had a distributor, they'd get the money. Unless you actually ran booked the theaters, you actually took the ticket money. Basically, the distributor and the theater company is going to split it sort of 50-50. And the reason you as producer would not hardly get any of that money. So that was just so we used to call theatrical release a loss leader. It was necessary because a lot of overseas companies say, if you don't do a theatrical release for your film, we will not buy it. We will require you to do a theatrical release. And the reason is because the PR that you get and the word of mouth that you got from doing a good theatrical release would translate into good reviews and good Rotten Tomatoes and good everything, good marketing for overseas as well. And so people would say, okay, well, because you had like a 24 week, 24 screen or 30 screen release inside the United States, and you made X amount at the box office, I believe your film is good, so I will buy the rights for France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. I will go ahead and I will buy the rights for my particular countries, and it will appear in our theaters here, and then it will go on to our cable systems here and our streaming systems here. Now, because of COVID, I don't even know how that works. I don't think anybody else does either. We're not even sure how theatrical release is going to come back. It may be the case that every film or a lot of films get four-walled, where the producer will literally just pay to rent the theater, put the film into the theater, do the marketing to fill the theater, make money off of it, and then use that to prove that the film has value. And there are films that have four-walled very successfully in the past, Passion of the Christ being one, although that four-walled in churches. But there have been films that have four-walled very successfully. So that strategy may become more common. It's just hard to know what's going to happen with theatrical release. So I hope that's helpful to you. It's been quite the year. Cool. Let me just go ahead and dot over here. Cool. So this, Lori asked, will this presentation that I've done be available as part of the resources that are given to you if you signed up for $35? Yes. And if you're a VIP Pro, yes, you will automatically get it as well. I will, but in the next 24, 48 hours, maybe 72 hours, I'll go ahead and edit it up and I'll make it available and fire off an email to people. And again, we have more bonus events coming up. So if you are a VIP Pro, I'm going to dive deep on more of this. I'm going to dive deep on a set of topics like funding. And if you sign up for $35, you'll automatically get access to those resources as well. So, which kind of makes sense, It's like it's going to take me 4 weeks to get through the material, and I'll be doing 3 more videos or whatever, and you'll get access to those because you signed up for this set of resources. Cool. If you're a VIP Pro, you actually have access to additional resources as well. Cool. Let me go ahead and take a look at, cool. I'm gonna do a quick look at email just to make sure I haven't, sometimes people are listening by phone and they can't, because you can listen to this by phone, and they may not have access to the resources to send me questions the old-fashioned way. And let's see. All right, cool. All right. I'm always available, and you can always send me an email at nancy@nancyfultonmeetups.com. A lot of the information that I've covered and that's in the set of resources is available to you, and it's going to take you a little bit of a digesting time, and you're going to have to meld it with any development that you've already been doing and any script that you've already written. You're going to have to sort of think things through. So you may not have questions right now. They will occur to you as you're moving forward. You can always reach out to me. People have reached out to me 3, 4, 5 months after they've had an event, and they send me the questions via email and I answer them via email. Sometimes people want to talk to me via phone or via Zoom. I'm happy to do it. I have to charge you, but you don't. If you're emailing me, I'd just go ahead and do it for free as a general rule. If you want me to talk to you on the phone for 1 or 2 hours, then I charge like $50 or $100, and like $50 an hour with a 2 hour minimum to start. So you don't have to. I don't make any any of my money or most of my money this way. So, for providing consulting like that, and that's mostly because I provide answers to questions in writing for free. So I hope you take advantage of that. So Don says, if it takes 4K to 80K to pre-vet your project, is that more or less a fixed cost regardless of the actual size of budget? So I don't think that it does take 4K to 80K to pre-vet your project. If you were doing a $10,000 project or a $20,000 or $50,000 project, you would spend way less because you wouldn't have the same set of requirements it has to meet. You wouldn't be taking money from investors. You wouldn't have to spend money um, looking at hiring a casting director, because you wouldn't hire one, because you're just going to hire non-union talent, the best that you can get. You're going to be doing it all yourself. So it's as your project value goes up, the cost of doing the um, development goes up, because you have to do things. If I'm doing a 500K project or $1 million project or a $5 million project, and I'm going to be accepting money from investors, I have to talk to a securities attorney, and I have to talk to him about whether or not I'm going to do a Regulation D private placement or I'm going to do Regulation CF, and I'm going to have to talk to an accountant, because I have to talk about how I'm going to, and a tax accountant at that, because I have to talk about how I'm going to, how the taxes are going to work for me and for my investors, and I have to set up a collection account management to take the money in and pay people out. I mean, the deal gets more and more and more complex and that has higher and higher and higher costs on the development side. So it's not the case that it is not a fixed cost. It does go up as the project becomes more complex. It's not. It is. You are always. You personally are going to be spending this money, and you're going to be doling it out. Like when you want to have somebody gives you a screenplay, right? Let's say you decide you're going to produce a project and you've got a screenplay that you like, and you need to find out how much it's going to cost to produce to produce that screenplay. That means, how many locations does it have, how many actors are in it, how many days of the lead actors there, how many cameras are we going to be shooting with, and all of these questions have to get answered. So you have a line producer. It's usually who you hire, and they usually cost about $5,000, maybe $10,000 sometimes, but between that amount. And you hand them the screenplay, and you say, "Give me a shooting schedule, and give me a production budget, and give me a day out of days." And you need that information, because then you know how much your film's actually going to cost. You're not guessing how much it's going to cost. You know exactly how much it's going to cost. You can prove to investors you know how much it's going to cost. Also, you know how much, by looking at it, you get a sense of how much you're going to spend. And it can be the case you look at it and go, you know what, I have more special effects than you've accounted for, so you need to increase this amount. Or I'm going to be shooting on digital sets, so this scene, and this scenes are going to be shot on green stain, so they're going to be less expensive than the on-site locations you've chosen. So you make a lot of decisions when you're going through that budgeting process. That means that the more um, complex, and you may spend more time doing that as the budget price goes up, because usually when a film's $5 million, it has more effects than something that's being shot for 500K. So it's just not a fixed cost. The budget of the project, the the project that the screenplay that you're choosing to select, and the budget level you choose to work at is going to have a massive impact on how much your development costs are going to be. And if you have more questions about that, do send me an email at nancy@nancyfultonmeetups.com, and I'm happy to discuss it with you further. But it's not by any means a fixed cost. As the budget level goes up, the development costs go up. It is 20%. It's not a fixed cost. Cool. Let's see. All right. I had a very good time hanging out with you, and I really hope that oh, sorry, there's more questions. If Don says a small budget should cost less, but in the world of studios, are these costs more or less fixed regardless of the size of projects? Okay, so another thing we need to talk about is, this is talking about producing independent film. When you move into the studio world, things are entirely different, but they're not, generally speaking, doing $5 million films. I mean, Blumhouse might do it for the first movie in what might be a franchise. They had some projects early on that were $5 million, but generally speaking, you're not at the studio system. You're an independent film producer, and you're choosing to produce projects. When you work with a studio, they may have a line item, a budget. They decide it's going to be what they allocate to do. They won't spend more than this to do the development for a particular project, but that's not really the people that you're working with or working for. So and then Patricia asks, if you write the script and want to direct and produce the film, how does it change how you navigate this journey? Well, you get the script for less, but you actually have to spend more time and money vetting it. And if you're going to be directing, you better know how to direct. You better have directed other projects, right? In other words, if you want to be a writer, director, producer, you really do need to start by producing low-cost projects first, because you're taking on a huge amount of work. And you do not want to be working on $1 million project when you haven't even produced a $10,000 project before as a director, right? And you also are going to spend more time vetting your content because you want to make sure that it's actually good and that there's a target market for it. If you as a producer are, say, okay, I want to produce a film, and I'm going to do it for the Dungeons and Dragons market, and I'm going to go buy a screenplay, or I'm going to go buy a book about that was written for the Dungeons and Dragons market, and it's been selling really well. And I'm going to get my favorite screenwriter to turn that book into a screenplay. Well, there's been several checks on your pride and your hubris and your belief that you're a very talented writer, because one, the book was successful, and the book made money from a certain target market, and you have a screenwriter that you really like, and presumably you like them because they've done good work for you in the past and probably have a lot of credits. So you've got two tests built in there to make sure that the script is actually good. If you personally, just out of your hat, decide, well, I really want to do something on a film on being homeless in Los Angeles, and that's going to be the film that I do. And it's like, okay, well, you could choose to do that, but how many films about that particular topic have been financially successful at the budget level? And what's your experience as a successful writer? Like, has your work been produced by other people, and has it been successful financially? And then finally, what's been your experience directing? Have people liked what you directed in the past? So if you're going to be a writer, director, producer, I very much think you should start with smaller projects and sort of test your mettle as a writer, director, producer before you start graduating up to doing bigger and bigger projects. And actually, the littler projects will be more fun. People sometimes don't. It's really more fun to do a smaller project because the whole thing goes faster. It's much easier, and there's much less risk. And people are much. It's a lighter load. So if you haven't done it before, I recommend that you do. I think you'll find that as if you it's like it's less stressful to do something that's easy, straightforward, that you totally understand, and that you're going to see the outcome of in the 2-3 months, 4 months, versus diving into a project that's going to take you 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get from start to finish. All right. I've had a great evening, and I hope that you have as well. I look forward to hearing from you going forward. We do have bonus workshops coming up, and I very much hope that you attend. And I hope that if you, I'm going to be placing this workshop where people can get it. If you're enjoying the workshop, tell people about it. If you're not, tell me about it so I can fix it and make it better for you. Cool. And thank you very much. Have a great evening. Okay.